Kamala Harris wants to take away your guns. She says it's for your own good. But have you seen what happens when cities with strict gun control are still overrun with violence? The same people who push these policies live in gated communities and have armed security. Yet somehow they think disarming law-abiding citizens is the way to keep us safe. Today we'll talk about Kamala Harris's gun control positions and why Trump believes her plans will leave America more vulnerable. It's no secret that Harris has been vocal about tightening gun laws across the country, pushing for more restrictions on who can buy them and how they're used. But according to Trump, all this does is take power away from the people who actually need guns to protect themselves, especially in rural areas where help doesn't come with a 5-minute response time. And then there's the data. Trump points out that some countries have already realized that strict gun laws don't work and have reversed course, seeing crime drop as a result. So what does Harris really hope to achieve with her proposed restrictions? And why does Trump think she's got it all wrong? Stick around because we're diving into the numbers, the politics, and the reality of what happens when the government tries to take away your guns. Kamala Harris's stance on the Second Amendment is like a bad sitcom, full of contradictions and plot holes. She proudly declares herself as pro-Second Amendment and a gun owner, even bragging about having a firearm for personal safety. But while she enjoys her personal security, she's been busy crafting policies that would make it harder for law-abiding citizens to enjoy the same right. She's trying to have her cake and eat it too. One minute she's cozying up to gun owners, and the next she's gunning for their rights. Let's talk about her so-called common-sense gun control policies. Universal background checks? Sure, it sounds reasonable on paper, but Harris pushes it like it's the magic cure for gun violence. What she won't admit is that these checks already exist in many forms, and criminals aren't exactly walking into licensed dealers to buy guns. No, they're getting them through illegal means. Something background checks don't touch. But Harris wants to sell this plan as if it's going to make a dent in crime. Then there's her favorite, assault weapons bans. Harris loves to paint a terrifying picture of military-style guns in the hands of civilians. But the reality is that these firearms are already owned by millions of responsible Americans. Banning them won't take them off the streets. It just means law-abiding folks won't have access to them. Meanwhile, criminals will continue to get whatever weapons they want through black market channels. And don't get me started on her mandatory buyback scheme. She tries to frame it as a buyback, but it's more of a, we'll take your guns, and maybe we'll give you something in return if you're lucky kind of deal. It's confiscation in disguise, no matter how she spins it. Harris loves to claim she's not anti-Second Amendment, but her actions tell a different story. She calls the debate over gun control a false choice, saying you can support the Second Amendment while also supporting restrictions. But this isn't about common sense reforms, it's about slowly chipping away at gun rights. Harris wants to present herself as a moderate, but her policies are all about systematically dismantling the very freedoms she claims to support. Her position on guns is all about optics. She wants to look tough on crime and gun violence while cozying up to gun control advocates. But her policies don't do much for safety. They just make it harder for responsible citizens to defend themselves. The irony? She owns a gun herself and has no problem with her right to protection, yet she's more than willing to create barriers for everyone else. So what's Trump got to say about Kamala Harris and her gun control plans? Well, in classic Trump fashion, he doesn't mince words. For him, Harris's policies are not just misguided, they're reckless. Trump claims he believes that the Second Amendment is non-negotiable. He argues that any attempt to mess with that right leaves law-abiding citizens defenseless. In his view, Harris's policies, whether it's background checks or assault weapons bans, are just fancy ways of saying we're coming for your guns. Trump isn't shy about pointing out that while Harris is busy advocating for restrictions, she's also happily armed herself. A classic case of do as I say, not as I do, right? He often emphasizes that the people who need guns the most, families in rural areas or those living in high-crime neighborhoods, would be the ones left vulnerable by her policies. For these folks, a firearm is more than just a constitutional right, it's a lifeline. When you live 20 minutes away from any police response, a gun is the only backup you've got. But it's not just rural America Trump is concerned about. Urban areas, too, are seeing rising crime rates, and more Americans are buying guns for protection. Many of these new gun owners are women who just want to feel safe walking to their cars at night. For them, waiting around for the cops isn't an option. Trump taps into that primal need for self-defense, arguing that Harris's policies would strip that away and leave good people to fend for themselves. Beyond personal safety, Trump has always framed the Second Amendment as the bedrock of all other freedoms. To him, it's not just about owning guns, it's about maintaining power. A disarmed population, in Trump's mind, is vulnerable not just to criminals, but to government overreach. If the government can take away guns, what's stopping them from going after other rights? It's a slippery slope, and Trump makes it clear that once you start sliding, you're in trouble. And let's talk about criminals for a second. Trump's biggest critique of Harris's gun control efforts is that they're misguided. He argues that the criminals who don't follow the laws in the first place won't be affected by her plans. Background checks, mandatory buybacks, and gun bans won't stop bad guys from getting guns. They'll just make life harder for law-abiding citizens who play by the rules. Harris's focus on gun control, in Trump's eyes, is like treating a broken leg with a Band-Aid. Harris's gun control proposals don't stop with background checks and buybacks. She also advocates for specific measures like limiting high-capacity magazines and pushing for more stringent regulations on gun sales. Trump, however, sees these policies as a direct attack on law-abiding citizens, not the criminals Harris claims to target. For starters, the limits on high-capacity magazines are framed as a way to reduce the lethality of mass shootings. The logic Harris follows is idiotic. If shooters have to reload more often, they'll have fewer opportunities to shoot people quickly. But Trump argues that this kind of restriction doesn't stop criminals, who aren't exactly following the rules to begin with. Instead, these measures punish regular people who want to exercise their Second Amendment rights, particularly those who might need extra rounds for personal protection, especially in rural areas where backup could be miles away. After all, who do you think is more likely to care about a magazine capacity law, a law-abiding citizen or a hardened criminal? Exactly. Trump also takes issue with Harris's push for more stringent regulations on gun sales. Harris claims these are necessary to ensure guns don't fall into the wrong hands, but Trump believes these regulations only serve to inconvenience responsible gun owners. Criminals aren't purchasing guns at licensed dealers, filling out paperwork, and waiting for background checks to clear. They're getting their weapons illegally, whether through theft, the black market, or other shady means. In Trump's eyes, all these extra rules do is create more red tape for people who follow the law while doing little to stop criminals from getting their hands on firearms. Let's not forget Harris's mandatory buyback proposal for assault weapons. Trump has been vocal about how impractical and invasive this policy is. Mandatory buybacks sound friendly enough on paper, but Trump sees it for what it really is: confiscation with a nice PR spin. Trump's broader point is that these measures are more about appearance than actual safety. They do little to actually stop the bad guys. Meanwhile, regular citizens get bogged down by regulations that make it harder for them to protect themselves. And when you think about it, criminals aren't scheduling a time with the local gun shop for a background check. They're buying their weapons on the streets or stealing them from law-abiding citizens who might be disarmed thanks to policies like the ones Harris advocates for. The fundamental problem with Harris's approach, according to Trump, is that it targets the wrong group. Law-abiding citizens are the ones jumping through hoops to comply with her proposed regulations, while criminals continue to ignore the law entirely. And at the end of the day, Trump argues that taking guns away from responsible people won't stop those who are determined to break the law from committing violence. Instead, it leaves the good guys defenseless, while the bad guys keep on doing what they do best: breaking the rules. Trump's core critique of gun control is that it's a myth, one that politicians like Kamala Harris cling to, believing that stricter laws will lower crime rates. He points to cities like Chicago, which boasts some of the nation's strictest gun regulations, but remains a hotbed of violent crime. For Trump, this is proof that Harris's approach just doesn't hold water. Instead of stopping criminals, strict gun laws seem to tie the hands of law-abiding citizens while crime rates remain unchanged, and in a lot of cases, they even increase. Chicago continues to experience high levels of gun violence despite its tough laws. Trump argues that Harris's gun control strategy will only replicate Chicago's mistakes across the country. He's skeptical that adding more regulations will suddenly make criminals comply. If anything, he believes it will do the opposite, leaving regular citizens defenseless and emboldening criminals who don't play by the rules. So, does Harris's approach have any real-world success stories? Trump doesn't think so, and he's quick to point out examples of countries that have reversed strict gun laws and seen a reduction in crime as a result. Australia, for instance, might have made headlines for its strict gun buyback program, but Trump is more interested in places like Israel and the Czech Republic. In Israel, gun ownership among civilians has increased in recent years, largely due to concerns about terrorism, yet the country hasn't seen a rise in violent crime. Meanwhile, in the Czech Republic, a more relaxed approach to firearms ownership coincided with a significant drop in violent crime. For Trump, these are real-world examples that demonstrate the opposite of Harris's narrative. More guns in the hands of responsible citizens lead to safer communities. At the heart of Trump's argument is the idea that more guns in the hands of responsible citizens could actually lead to less crime. He's not just talking about rural communities where a firearm might be necessary for protection due to slow police response times. He's also thinking about urban areas where violent crime is a daily concern. Trump believes that allowing law-abiding citizens to arm themselves could deter crime, making criminals think twice before targeting someone who might be armed. In fact, Trump often points to states with more relaxed gun laws that have seen reductions in crime rates. Take Florida, for instance, where concealed carry laws have been in place for decades. The state has seen a steady decline in violent crime, which gun rights advocates attribute, at least in part, to its pro-gun policies. Trump frames this as a direct contradiction to Harris's belief that fewer guns will lead to safer streets. He argues that arming responsible citizens creates a deterrent, putting power back in the hands of the people rather than leaving them vulnerable to criminals. For Trump, the answer isn't more gun control, it's smarter gun ownership. His argument boils down to this: when good people have the means to protect themselves, it makes it harder for bad people to do harm. More guns in the right hands mean less crime, and Trump doesn't believe Harris's policies will change that. In fact, he fears they'll make things worse, leaving Americans more vulnerable in the process. And that's it for this video. So what do you think? Are Harris's policies the solution, or is Trump right in saying they missed the mark? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share this video with your friends and family to spread the word, and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell icon so you never miss out on more content like this. Thanks for watching and for your continued support.